Hey guys, this is Brandon Biggers. I've got Kelly Dennis with me. We're just wanting to put something
Hello.
together to recap this most recent OP season for FanZ.
To add to that, what we're also going to try and do, and then in the coming weeks and months, we're going to try and piece together some bits of content here and there to kind of keep things moving until we get to the next OP season and get to the next set release, whether that be half set or a full set, what have you.
Ready to dive right into this?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Let's go.
Well, right before we had, because we've got a spreadsheet that we're showing you guys right now with all the events. But one of the things that Kelly had mentioned before we started recording is that we actually don't have the first events that actually earned power level, and it was post Universal Clash, which was the Bagel Bash. Yeah, so the main point that I think you had something that you really wanted to harp on with Bagel Bash, Kelly, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, yeah, that was sort of like an unofficial kickoff to the OP season, and one, it was the first event out of the gates, and then two, if there's a thorn in the side of this latest OP season, it's Gogeta, and the biggest reason why we want to make sure it gets discussed is because that's where Gogeta debuted. Anthony Tardino showed up with Gogeta and just completely rolled through that tournament
Yeah, he
without.
unleashed the monster.
Yeah. So it takes me back to when the set dropped, and it's weird. I was in the middle of moving, so I was in a bit of like a unique situation. I remember exactly when the set dropped, and as soon as I saw that Gogeta ally on Dropbox, I just looked at it, I'm like, oh my God, I'm building a deck with this immediately. And I'm probably not the only one who thought that too. Obviously, Anthony Tardino jumped on that right away. He and I were talking about how to build a deck pretty early, and I did not, going into that event, I was not brave enough to bring that deck into that tournament when I was still looking at it as like a fresh, new, clever, or fresh, new idea, kind of a pet deck.
Hmm.
And sometimes I get cold feet bringing pet decks into an official tournament.
Well, and
Uh,
I don't think any of
yeah,
us really thought it was going to be as strong as it ended up being. Any deck that relies on one ally has a lot of really inherent weaknesses, and so I know I won't speak for everybody. I was like, oh wow, this is a strong deck, but I mean, anything that packs a lot of removal is just going to roll right over it, and it's not. And then
yeah.
you're stuck running Villain Vegeta, and oh how wrong we were.
Yeah, it's been a long running meme, and little do you know it actually works out in practice this past season. And I remember you and I were talking about it too. I think did you have a version
I
when
did.
he first came out, or
Yes,
yeah,
yeah,
you
I
had
had
a
built it pretty
version.
immediately. Um,
You had a version. I had a version. Anthony had a version, and we were like all trading ideas. And I remember on Retro, there were quite a few people even still recognizing how strong it was, but the phrase glass cannon was getting thrown around a lot. There are a lot of parallels to Turles and some of what are other glass cannon decks? I don't know. Turles comes to mind. That's just
yeah,
one
for sure,
example.
for sure.
Um,
But
and
it's a little
people,
bit more solid than a glass cannon, so um, it definitely bears mentioning that the first unofficial OP event of the season was won by Gogeta in convincing fashion.
yeah, and and keep in mind this is pre-nerf, which we'll get to later.
It's important that you bring up that CRD because it was a bit of an emergency CRD too, and we do see a lot of different themes before and after. There are definitely some decks that were steamrolling events. They were just consistently topping top four, and then post nerf, obviously, like we saw some people kind of regress back to stuff that they felt was more sure. I think things that
Yeah,
have been good for a while. So,
yeah,
well, do we want to jump in and talk about the first official OP event, North Carolina?
yep. We were talking about this earlier. I think your initial observation here was the breakdown. Granted, there were only eight. There were only eight people, which, frankly, all things considered, not all that surprising. We're entering the winter months, getting closer to holidays, so travel becomes a bit more unpredictable, a bit more financially difficult. So, yeah, the turnout here, not surprising. And what's also not surprising is Universal Clash had just recently come out. Granted, Bagel Tournament did happen, but it was still relatively early in the season, early in this new meta following the season. So you see a lot of decks in here that are familiar
Hmm.
relative to prior sets, prior metas, and that's really not much of a surprise. New set comes out and Sometimes people are just willing to experiment, especially if they're not playing as frequently as others are.
Yeah, and I mean, and you're right. It was kind of an awkward OP season. Nobody had an official event in 10 months since TOP at that point, because TOP was
Yeah.
in January and this is in November. Um, and so it does kind of seem like people went back to what they felt they knew was good. You've got
Hmm.
Anthony, who pioneered Gogeta there, jumping in with Frost as well. So he's our innovator. But Orange Energetic Vegito, Knowledge Piccolo, Future Gohan, those MPs have been around forever, and we know they're generically strong. I mean, Knowledge Piccolo existed since Set One; it's dominated metas since Set One. Energetic Vegito still an absurdly strong deck that Nate obviously piloted well and won the event with, and then Future Gohan I would refer to as a safe pick. Future
Yeah.
Gohan is really good when you're walking into an event and you don't know what you're going to see just because it shuts down usually what your opponent is trying to do. So, and then I guess the new wrinkle there would be Namekian Empowered, which gives him those free energies and gains that anger. So you're chaining through Future Gohan's level, which I think you kind of have to do with Future Gohan in this meta.
I see you borrowing my future Gohan tangent from our earlier recording.
Listen, man, when you make a good point, like people start to parrot that. So,
Yeah, yeah. I think not too much to take away here from the North Carolina parade. Obviously, congrats to Nate and appreciate Anthony for bringing in new stuff. I think the next one after this was the speaking of Anthony.
yeah,
Um, so we have for those who are aware, this was originally scheduled for the as a Maryland pre, effectively a follow up to the usual Frederick face-offs that Anthony would host. Anthony was moving at the time after it had been scheduled. So, with his logistics and flux, we kind of took it over from New Jersey, and we were able to pull that together on his behalf. But also small turnout. I think the small turnout again. Winter season, financial constraints when people are already traveling and whatnot, and then just the movement logistically late in the process. It's just life happens, so it's whatever.
it does. This
But
was another this
yeah,
was another small event though. We only had 6 participants, and that always makes it awkward when you're trying to throw an
yeah,
official event and you only have 6 people, and you're kind of throwing your hands up. As a TO myself, it's kind of like, okay, so what do I do when I don't even have enough to really do a top cut? Like, what are we doing? If and Anthony, continues a
dude,
really strong showing
dude,
by winning with Unity Supreme Guy.
you see my name right
Yeah,
there
there's
below.
somebody I recognize there.
So this event was frustrating because for the Bagel Bash that we spoke about earlier, I had planned on using Gujide. I got cold feet as soon as I saw Fuji Gohan floating around and some other decks. I got cold feet. I used something else. I scrubbed out. And then I told myself, all right, next event I'm running Gujide. Here I did run Gujita, obviously, and I lost away in Swiss, but I beat him in top four, and then I met Anthony in the finals. And Unity Supreme Kai runs, I don't know, 25, 30 dead cards.
Yep.
And I going into that, I know it's a combo deck, and I know how Anthony, plays, and I've seen this deck before in some way, shape, or form. So I knew that it was going to be difficult to go up against because I had a ton of options. If you have experience playing planning and ally shenanigans type blue decks, there's a lot of optionality. There's a ton of action economy because of just how much, I guess action economy blue has built into their planning and ally cards.
Right, and he
And
had some kind of degenerate ball interactions in that deck too.
yeah, it's commie ball and steroids.
Yeah,
Realize, in fact, I'm surprised Dan he didn't build it. Um, but yeah,
it
no,
sounds like a
I
BE deck.
Yeah, I just got eviscerated in this game. I think Anthony drew Blue Betrayal on the first turn of the game, or Tug, or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
Uh, Goo Ally was in play for maybe like 5 seconds of a 15-minute game. That's how quick he won. I got sacked, and it proved that Fujita could be beat.
I think that's kind of a theme that we saw throughout this season is that, especially post CRD, pretty much every deck has something that can exploit its weaknesses. No, not everybody may agree, but I feel like that's a pretty healthy meta that we're walking into until we start to see some of the decks in a few of these later events that were just pretty much unfair. they just sort of they sort of took over, and nothing anybody could do about it. But
Uh,
well, moving
um,
on.
all right. Yeah, I think we got our first Kai.
Hey, look,
Another.
it's Gogeta again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one observation I've been making as maybe I didn't think about it until now, but I, I guess maybe prior to this past OP season, would you ever have thought blue to be one of the better styles in the game?
Uh, I feel like blue has one of the things that I've said about blue in the past is that it's going in different directions. You know,
Hmm.
you have an ally package, you have a setup package, you have a copy package, and
Yeah.
it just felt like whereas other styles like red, everything angry or physical is going to be good in red, or orange, anything drill related is going to be good. Like blue just felt like it was pulled in too many directions, and I think that we really got the Unity support in Universal Clash. That was really really strong. It really pushed Unity to the top of the list. And then other than that, you've got MPs that really bring out blue strengths like Gogeta and Hirobu.
Two things come to mind. It's Unity, as you mentioned. It got real support, and I know it was divisive. Well, almost everybody was hating on it when it first
Hmm.
came out.
Well, it wasn't
Um,
good when it came out. You know, it felt like it limited your options. It the support it got in the form of support fire and deletion, I think,
yeah,
really just kind of pushed it to the forefront. Extra removal is never going to be bad, and +2 life mod.
yep.
I mean, we
Oh yes,
you
yeah.
you and
Support
I
fire
are
is
both
broken.
familiar with how quickly that gets out of hand with like Ginyu, for
Yes,
instance.
yeah.
So
Uh, the and the second item, which I think maybe is value add, maybe even more value add than deletion and support fire because it fits into any blue deck in existence. Blue snare. As
yes.
soon as
Oh,
I
how could I
read that,
forget Blue Snare?
as soon as I read that card, I'm like, blue's back on the map.
It is.
It's subtle. When I first read that, it gave me that like. Remember when you first saw Red Gambit and you
Yes.
first read that,
Yeah.
and then anytime you see it during the game, it's like, oh man, this feels so good.
Yeah.
Maybe blue snare not in your hand, but just when it appears,
When it
particularly
goes off,
with
man.
taking
Oh,
damage.
oh.
It feels so
It's so
good.
ugly. We saw that
Uh,
on stream a few times this season, where just the blue snares hit, and you're just like, "Oh man," because
I,
it's so
I mean, I experienced it firsthand at North Kai where it swung that finals.
for sure.
It felt good. But anyway, yeah, no, I feel like Blue Snare doesn't get mentioned enough, but it is a phenomenal like style. Oh,
It's great.
screw it. I'll speak in hyperbole. It is a style defining card.
It
No,
is.
it is a
No, it is.
two of in every deck.
Well, it's a very blue card. I think it does the things that blue wants to do, which is,
Yes.
you know, be defensive and lower lower MPs. I mean, that's classically even going back to score. That's the
Yep.
blue style is just, you know,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be on the back burner. I'm gonna play defense, and you're gonna be punished for attacking me.
Yeah.
West
Yep.
Kai. This was the Kai. We had 6 participants. It was done round robin, which is a legal way to do it based on the Pansy tournament guide. So I know some
Hmm.
people have given them some flack for that. I jokingly did earlier, but it was legal, and
Hmm.
we see a lot of the usual suspects. That you know the Gogeta theme continues.
Yep.
Vegeta, Hero Jita is still very strong. You've got Henry, who loves him some Hero Boo, and we saw Hero Boo perform really well this season. Every time Hero Boo was played, he top cut.
Pre-nerf and post-nerf with
Pre nerf
different
and
masters,
post
in
nerf.
fact.
Absolutely. Because nothing happened to Boo with the nerfs, and
Yep.
he's also a great Gogeta counter while we're speaking on that because his MP just well no
The
never mind he doesn't banish.
No, no, he doesn't deal with Gogeta directly, but I think the action economy with all the life
Mhm.
card damage that he brings, just the damage output is on par with Gogeta in the aggregate. Gogeta will hit harder at the individual attack level, but in the aggregate, Hero Boo will keep up with 5 life card here, 5 life card here, 5 life card here, 6 life card here. Before you know it, it's going 12 attacks, and you're just sitting there twiddling your thumbs.
Yep. And
Um,
one interesting thing I'd like to point out is just about a specific player, which is Eric Johnson. in this event. He ran Saiyan Rampaging Vegeta, which he's been running really well for a while
Yeah.
now. And I find it interesting that from this event on, I think he runs Gogeta for the rest of the season. So,
No, he had, so he no, so he ran Ramp Vegeta at South Guy, which
oh,
we'll
okay,
we'll see
cool.
later.
All right.
But I mean both are extremely strong. He's been running Ramp Vegeta for God knows how long, and he just refines that with set after set after set. And
Yep.
I have, for some reason, him and his brother I get paired with in tournaments all the time. And I played as Ramp Vegeta once. I was for some reason I thought twice. I played him at Sap Guy, and that deck is just like so tough to go up against. It's not so bad because it's like that like a rampaging deck. The silver lining is they're linear because you know exactly what their strategy is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But problem is Vegeta just takes that strategy to the nth degree in terms of just raw speed, power, whatever you
Mm-hmm.
want to call it.
Absolutely.
Um,
Because if you're
just
going
something
to
to take
do
off from.
something and everybody knows what you're going to do, you should probably be really good at it.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't have to outsmart you. It just executes really well.
And I
And
think
again,
that that's, I mean, the best decks in the game right now do that after
mhm.
the CRD especially. So,
Yeah, yeah, and they're especially dangerous in the hands of players who, with through repetition,
hmm
super clean and consistent with the operation. So
definitely. Well, moving past West Kai, we had Grand Kai. Um,
yeah,
and so,
I don't have the participants. I think this one was a 6 or 8. I had asked Martin earlier today how many. I believe it's in the 6 to 8 territory.
yeah, I
But
think it was larger than West Kai, but not by much.
yeah, the one thing I did want to point out, like we've seen the North Carolina pre 6 to 8 people, we've seen West Kai 6 to 8 people,
hmm
the New Jersey pre 6 to 8 people, Grand Kai 6 to 8 people, and I think I already mentioned West Kai. I absolutely appreciate getting OP season out there, especially after a long wait. But I think from just looking at the trends,
hmm
you'll see these events, the closer and closer they are to the holidays, the more difficult it is to get a real turnout, the more difficult
Absolutely.
it is for people to like get out and travel,
hmm
whether it be snow, weather, holidays, financial constraints, family constraints, whatever. The turnouts are relatively low. Absolutely, again, appreciate getting these on the schedule. Any chance to go out and play live cards is great. Just yeah, the winter season's a little tough, so the turnout's gonna be a little bit lower.
For sure. Grand Kai was the event where Paul achieved his dream. He's finally getting to make his red card. It's been a long
Yeah,
wait, man, but he wins
yeah,
that one with Red Ruthless Hero Vegeta. Um, this was also the first event where somebody ran Dende, and Mr. Frank DeLuca and I have been on Namekian Knowledge Dende for several years at this point, and I was a
yeah.
little miffed because I was planning on running it at Supreme Kai the next month already, and so he debuted it, and I was like, oh no, the secret's out because he ended up getting seconds. Which again, Dende from this point, as we look at the rest of the season, takes over. He doesn't have below a top four finish, and he doesn't win an event, but he's always a threat to. And it's really an unfair deck if we're being honest. Like it plays the
Yeah.
game differently.
What?
It needed
Yeah.
the nerf, as much as I hate to admit it.
Knowledge Dende is really strong to where it just popped up in the meta and it was nerfed and wiped off the face of the earth in less than what 3 4 months maybe. So like,
Yeah,
where
it
the
was
hell was
fast.
knowledge? Where was Knowledge Dende before now? And I think you have a better perspective on that than I do.
I think enhanced made it really really difficult for Dende to shine. Specifically, your enhanced Broly. Like there is no way that I could comfortably run Dende in a meta where there is a deck that can crit me every turn just by existing. So it's,
Yeah.
I mean, it was really hard. So I think enhanced sort of taking a back burner, the meta becoming a little bit more life card based because Dende tends to struggle with really hard physical beats. I think the meta becoming a little bit more life based shifted toward his favor. Things kind of slowed down a little bit. I felt like, and Dende kind of took advantage, especially with
Yeah.
people with Krillin being so popular, and
Yeah.
winning the previous TOP. Krillin could not beat Dende. Like there is no universe, and I played so many Krillins. Like he just can't beat Dende because Dende won't attack into him.
Yeah,
And
I think
so,
that
like it was just a really good time for Dende with things slowing down and being able to take advantage of that. You would have decks that were teched to try to beat Krillin and those slower decks, and Dende played the game a little bit differently. Like I think that his strategy was a little less straightforward, and the like his powers. There's a lot of value on his stack that you didn't see if you weren't familiar with him. And
yeah.
so I think in my experience, I tended to see my opponents make some mistakes because they weren't aware of what I was trying to do most of the time. So,
Yeah, that's a value when you're sitting across from a stack you're either not familiar with
hmm
or just the engine you're not familiar with. You're not going to play optimally. You're not going to make the right decisions relative to what your opponent wants you to do or maybe not do. Um, but to put a bow on your recap of his, I guess, the chronol chronology,
yeah,
chronology,
yeah, chronology.
chronology around Dende. You're absolutely right. I remember when we're still kind of in COVID, and this is when Enhanced started kind of booming. There were still people, and I think you included, Frank included, who were running either Knowledge Dende. I know TJ had a Radiant Dende as
hmm
well. So he was around, but then I think the tournaments we were doing online at the time, Enhanced was just like steamrolling Dende. It's like, well, he's not viable because Enhanced is just everywhere. And then he just kind of disappeared, and everybody forgot about him.
hmm
And for whatever reason, this because of how close to COVID times those sets were. I feel like that there was no formal OP. People just forgot about those cards, or I don't know. He just feels forgotten in the
Well,
same
and
vein as like Tapion and Janemba get forgotten.
so
Um,
we're forgetting a couple like relevant things that happened in between, which were creation, Dende's creation, not creation. What is it called? Distress. Dende's Distress came out.
oh my God!
Yeah,
Oh, good Lord! Oh,
yeah.
I
Dende's Distress,
I knew there was something.
like pushed him over the top, and then Namekian Downtime was another card that just
Good Lord!
it just enabled Knowledge Dende's engine so well because now we're searching for our right throws and we're just gaining
See,
anger in bunches. So
See, I, I knew something was. I felt like something was missing. Where I was
yeah,
gonna go is like, oh hey, Denley was around, and Hands buried him, and people just forgot about him.
yeah.
Well, I mean that's still true, and nobody went back to him. Really, I don't think until, as you said, Distress came out
I
that
never
completely
forgot.
forgot about. Oh
I
well,
loved
see,
Dende
well
the whole time.
you've used Denley, so like I said, you were the better person. You had the better perspective on that. But yeah, no, I totally forgot about that half set that came out.
Yep.
Yeah, Dende's Distress busted us all hell and brought Dende back to relevance, and it
hmm
really kind of reminded people like, hey, this busted stack exists, and that's exactly what happened. So yeah, I mean, and we see Dende kind of bursting onto the scene.
Well,
So
and then just kind
when
of to, I guess, to round out the rest of Grand Kai.
yeah,
I mean, nothing's really surprising here, right? Like we've got Orange Energetic
it,
Vegito, Knowledge Piccolo, Sand Rampaging Vegeta again with my man Eric. So I was wrong; he did run Ramp Vegeta again. And
that's
then we
right, yeah.
see Adaptive Goku pop up for the first time, and
hmm
that was a menace. So
It
uh,
was. I guess takeaways from Grand Kai. I know we kind of scrolled down to Grand Kai and then started talking about Dende and whatnot for like the entire time. Once we approached here, what I had in mind, I feel like Grand Kai is where you start to see the meta that would take shape to begin to formulate at this event.
I
You
agree.
had a few events get out there. When did that half set come out? That came that with all the name cards. Was that
It was in the summer.
before?
Yeah, it was before the
Oh,
season started.
okay. All right. Well, well, I sound like an idiot, but anyway, I feel like this is where people really started kind of getting acquainted with what would eventually kind of like what the meta would formulate into, as I said. And congrats to Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. Dream fulfilled. So then we
Yep.
had Supreme Kai, which I hosted. This was a strong event. I think we had 16 players show up.
hmm
So at that time, it was the largest event of the season. So you've got Krillin, who is top cutting for the first time in this season. Both Mischievous Krillin and Protective Krillin top cut. Two TNs. Piccolo is back. Lane wins with Namekian Empowered Piccolo. That finals was monstrous. I beat him in Swiss, and then his opening hand has two Special Beam Cannon and Wall Breaker. Because he tutored one, but
hmm
he gets rid of my Feast of Pawns, gets rid of anything that could handle wall breaker, and then he attaches wall breaker, and I'm just like, oh, cool. And then I just had to slowly watch myself die for 30 minutes, which was a great time for me. Had gone undefeated up to that point. So, yeah, so we see Dende take the field again, Piccolo. And I agree with you. I think that this is the point where we really start to see the meta and start to see the decks that felt much more powerful than the others show up.
I think based on the number of participants, you said what, we had about 16-ish people show up for
Mm-hmm.
this event. So
Yep.
you see us just starting to get away from the holidays. So from here, the event started getting into that 16, 20, slightly over 20 range. So you're going to get a lot more variability in terms of the representation throughout the standings. And I also think it's around this time, we're at about our fifth or sixth event overall, and we haven't seen Gogeta pop up in the last couple events as of Supreme Kai. I think it's around here where Gogeta was at the Bagel Bash that I did not have on the Excel sheet.
Mm-hmm.
He was at New Jersey. He was at West Kai.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, people have been convinced, all right, Gogeta, it's a real threat, not a glass cannon, and it will steamroll. It's very caveman, very just dumb caveman.
Unga bunga, baby.
Draw draw cards, drop attacks, draw more cards, drop more attacks, and then you're like games are over in 5-10 minutes on a
Mm-hmm.
routine basis. So I think it's around this time people started acknowledging, okay, that's a really good deck,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not my sort of deck. Most people who still play now are playing to have fun, and competition comes second. Yeah, there are some people who kind of just prioritize competition over fun, and that's totally fine. But I think at this point, people looked at Gogeta and thought, hey, I don't want to go that route. It seems too easy. And also, you go to an event, you go through 6, 7 rounds where each game is like literally 5 to 10 minutes, maybe even 15 minutes at the longest.
Mm-hmm.
You're not getting a lot of return on investment when you bring a deck like that to a tournament. So these last few events where you don't see Gogeta, I don't think that has anything to do with whether or not it's a valid deck or not. I think it's just once it hit this status, and at this point it's basically, would you say it's like tier zero status
I think it was tier
at that
zero
point?
at this point in time.
Yeah,
Um, there were a few tier zero decks, and that was absolutely
yeah.
one of them. So
Yeah, and to wrap up that point, what I'm really trying to say is just you see Gogeta fall off a little bit, not because it is not a legitimate deck, it just hit a certain status where people are like, hey, I'm not having fun with this.
I think that people started to expect him as well, because a lot of these decks
That's
are
true.
running
That's
Tug.
true.
I know in my Dende, like I was running Tug just specifically for Gogeta if he happened to show up.
Hmm.
And like Piccolo doesn't have a bad Gogeta matchup because Lethal Chop takes care of it pretty well. Krillin doesn't have a horrible Gogeta matchup just because if he doesn't see Dig, like you can fend him off a little bit until you're okay. I mean, I think that you see people running things that they believe can handle that kind of a deck, and that's just my opinion. Because I mean, we've seen enough orange energetic Vegito in this breakdown that I mean, people are still playing to win. It's not that they're
Hmm.
scared to play orange. It's not that they, of whatever reason. I mean, I think that people are still running things that they believe are the best decks that they could run.
I
Yep.
think it's a combination of both. Just people, falling out of or not getting as much fun out of using it, but then also, hey, people just silver bullet your deck, and if goo isn't out there, then you're going to be having a tough time.
Yep.
But yeah, no, it's
Absolutely.
combination of both.
Yep. I guess that kind of wraps up Supreme Kai. Congrats to
Yeah,
Wayne. He
I,
deserved it.
yeah, and I think before moving on, we've talked a lot about Dende and Gogeta along the way, but like we haven't. I mean, I feel like before moving on, we should give Empower Piccolo some love because it literally won this tournament, and we haven't talked about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do you say about it? I mean, it's a deck that is just generically strong. Piccolo with the ability to tutor Lethal Chop or Beam Cannon or Multiform. It runs double attacks. It's trying to out action you. It's very aggressive. Whereas Knowledge Piccolo is trying to win multiple ways. Empowered Piccolo is like, I'm just going to hit you in the face until you stop. Yeah, I mean,
I,
it's absolutely one of the best decks in the format.
I think one last thing to point out is the build Wayne used specifically was not to win the tournament. It was not your traditional empowered Piccolo, and you sat across from it and got steamrolled by doing while doing
Uh,
nothing. You can speak to it better than I can.
Absolutely. And I think that he is a lot more aggressive than some of the other empowered Piccolo decks out there. We've talked quite a bit about it because, I won South Kai last year with empowered Gohan, and I don't run Dig in that deck. And Wayne is an adamant supporter of putting Dig in empowered because there's really no other way to circumvent endurance and push a ton of damage. Piccolo doesn't have any mods, so he is relying on cards like Dig and Defiant Challenge, which I've not seen in a lot of Piccolo lists, to cycle those named cards more effectively and to push that damage. Because, and we saw in TOP when we get there, he took over that game very, very quickly and put Derek on the ropes very fast because of how aggressive he has built that deck. And it was really
Hmm.
interesting because, I was a wall breaker away from losing to him in Swiss, but he played wall breaker and I played Feast, got rid of the wall breaker immediately, wasn't a big deal, sped to MPPV in Swiss. But then he saw wall breaker in Top Cut and used Beam Cannon to snipe out my Feast pawns, and it was just
Sounds about
over.
right.
Yeah, there's nothing I could do. He just shut me completely down. And I think another thing to be said there is that that's just who Wayne is as a player. He adapts, he's smart, he learns from his experiences, and a deck like Empowered Piccolo in the hands of someone like Wayne, it's a killer. It'll get you.
Yeah.
But I would like to point out even that it's not a deck that's unbeatable because he lost 2 games in Swiss at that event. The Ghouls event before when we get to that, he went 0-2 and dropped with the same build. It's not something that's just this juggernaut that's unbeatable. It's obviously one of the best decks out there. I would like to point out Resolute TN here with my boy Axel using FanZ level 1 TN. Very cool. He gets cool points for making top 8.
Yeah, I
Perceptive
love it.
TN with Andrew, like you were talking about Wayne and Slug earlier. Same thing with Andrew and TN. Like he knows every interaction, knows exactly how to play it. So, and that was not the last time we'll see him.
No,
So,
we'll get to that.
yeah, Iskai.
Yeah, my stopping grounds. This is the event I feel like had the heaviest influence on the in-season nerfs that would follow literally like a week or two after the completion of this event.
Absolutely. And
And
if you look at number 1 on the list here, Orange Adaptive Goku by Kevin
yep.
Dennis. So the problem with Orange Adaptive Goku is that it took Super Goku and it just eliminated every weakness. So it made the nerfs to Aura basically meaningless. Because as soon as you draw a drill, you are getting the Goku engine going and you're never losing those drills. And so it created a huge difficulty for other decks to attack through. Um, and I ran into that in Top Cut myself because I couldn't get rid of the drills that were really hurting my strategy because Attraction Drill was there. And I couldn't D-level Goku as a blue deck to get rid of his drills because he's adapted mastery. And so it created this almost feedback loop of just awfulness where if he sees the silver bullet, and he will because he can tutor it, I am going to lose. And we saw
Yeah.
that throughout the event. He ran Orange Driving Drill, which completely neutered Ginyu, and he had other things in store for Gogeta as well. One of my biggest takeaways is if you look at the top 4 of this event,
Hmm.
the 3 decks that were obviously the target of that CRD are Adaptive Goku, Tag Vegeta, and Knowledge Dende. And this was really the event that sparked a retro meltdown, honestly. There were threads about all 3 of these decks that people were
Yeah.
posting. And as a Dende player, I can tell you it's miserable to play against Dende. It is not a fun experience
Yeah, it is.
because it's like anything you do is going to advance his win con. And so it's like you just have to have something that's more busted or the ability to take something away, and that's Gogeta. Because if Gogeta sees Blue Tandem before Dende sees Tug, like Gogeta's going to run away with it. And then you just had Goku, who just building walls, man, and making sure that nobody can attack, nobody can. He's just going to outdamage everything you can do, and he's going to keep all of his tools that allow him to do that. And then we actually saw some softer nerfs to the 5 and 6 decks here as well, with Super Shenron. So we took
Oh yeah,
Super
that's right.
Shenron away from Ginyu and away from Brohan, which is a good call. I think it needed to happen. So I mean, it was really like this event was a lot of power players, and then you have Frost and Cooler making up the bottom, and a pet deck of Anthony's, and Red Ruthless Frost, which Frost is kind of he's sneaking his
That
way. He snuck his way, and I feel really bad for
yeah,
Mike because he got DQ'd due to
yeah.
Kevin's deckless sharking.
Yeah, so I can speak of that. So credit where credit is due. Speaking of Ruthless Frost, this is Casey's list.
Absolutely,
It was one for one. I
Casey
built it.
Handsman, baby.
Yeah, I've played against it several times, and I remember he and I were going back at it. I'm like, oh, Gucci does way better. He thought otherwise about Frost. We played several games. It was basically 50-50 split. So Ruthless Frost can get going just like Gogeta and keep up with
Absolutely,
it. Came in, gave that deck to Mike, who is our gracious and consistently available host of the bagel shop that we have these tournaments at. So thank God for Mike. Um, Mike took the list one for one. I think maybe made one minor tweak for personal preference, but that was it. And he performed really well, just picking that deck up without much practice. I mean, he's a beats red player at heart, so it's like one for one for him. But he picked it up, did really well. Unfortunately, just the deck list goof got him booted out of top eight. But I mean, Red Ruthless Frost is really good.
it is. And just to toot my own horn, first top 8 appearance of Ginyu in the season. Just saying. Um,
So we have the two Dendies here. The list that I ran is a little bit different from Mark's list. Mark ran Namek Dragon Balls along with some other personal preference choices.
yes,
I was running short on time. I had, and this will also speak to the power of Dende. I was traveling for work that week. I got like no testing done leading up to that week, and Knowledge Dende, I had maybe 2 live games played before entering that tournament, and just ran with it. And end of the day, with next to no practice, end up in top four. That's how strong Knowledge Dandy is. And I was sitting there just kind of thinking through plays and
yeah,
trying to work through things. And I felt like other than one minor stream, one minor stream misplay on both myself and Mike Calabrese, I feel like I played it pretty cleanly. But still, like I can come in with like very little practice with Dende and just make top four. That's how strong Dende
yep.
was. It just felt just inherently strong.
And you were learning how to play it as you were going, and that
Yeah.
was my experience too. Is like I would look at the cards in my hand and just be like, "Oh, I can do that." And I won a game once by playing ball 5 to shuffle in another ball. And I was like, oh, like I didn't even see that play before, but I was just sitting there at 4 anger and I was like, how do I win? I'm
Yeah,
about to die. And I'm
there's
like, oh,
yeah, there's so much optionality, and I think Mark I think Mark and TJ and Tommy still make fun of me for this comment, but like there are a lot of decision trees
oh, so
throughout
many
games
trees in
when
that decision forest.
when you play Dead Day. So,
Yep.
but at any rate, I think the takeaway here is biggest event we had so far in the season.
Yep. And people were pissed. Well, that is going to do it for our pre CRD recap of OP5 FanZ. And we had a lot to say on that one, right, Kelly?
Yeah, we did. I think we first got on here, we were going to do the whole season, and after several events, we're like, oh crap, all right, this is going to take way longer. So I think the in-season nerf serves as a really good splitting point, stopping point, and call it pre-nerf being part one and post-nerf part of the season being part two. So yeah, I think that's a natural stopping point.
Yeah, who would have guessed that two guys who can't ever shut up would have gone long, right? So, well, thanks, guys. This is the unofficial FanZ podcast. Please join us for our coverage of the post CRD OP5 in our next video.